In the shimmering heart of ancient Alexandria, where the Mediterranean kissed the golden sands of Egypt, a city of unparalleled brilliance thrived. Its towering lighthouse pierced the heavens, guiding ships through the night, while its fabled library housed the collective wisdom of humanity's scrolls of philosophy, mathematics, and poetry that promised to illuminate the world. Yet beneath this dazzling veneer of progress and enlightenment, a darker tale unfolded, one woven from threads of ambition, betrayal, and unspeakable trauma. This is not the story of Alexandria's triumphs, nor of its scholars who measured the earth's curve or debated the nature of the soul. This is the story of a woman whose life became a crucible of pain and power, a woman who reshaped an empire by institutionalizing the very horrors that scarred her. Queen Arsinoe II. Born into the ruthless Ptolemaic dynasty, Arsinoe was no stranger to the brutal calculus of power. Her world was one where daughters were pawns, traded for alliances or silenced to secure thrones. But what sets her apart is not merely the cruelty she endured, abuse at the hands of her father, Ptolemy the Wise Soter, and a marriage to a brutal general old enough to be her grandfather, but the way she transformed that suffering into a weapon. Arsinoe did not break under the weight of her trauma. She forged it into a blade, sharp and unrelenting, that carved her name into history. With chilling precision, she orchestrated marriages, murders, and manipulations. Not out of madness, but with a cold, calculated resolve that turned personal pain into state policy. She didn't just survive the unthinkable, she made it the cornerstone of a dynasty. What makes Arsinoe's story so gripping, so profoundly disturbing, is its duality. She was both victim and architect of a system that normalized incest and betrayal, a system that ensured the Ptolemaic bloodline would rot from within. Her intelligence was undeniable. She spoke 9 languages, reformed economies, and turned propaganda into an art form. Yet her legacy is a cautionary tale of how unhealed wounds can metastasize, poisoning not just a family but an entire civilization. The grandeur of Alexandria, the might of Egypt, crumbled not under foreign swords but from the slow decay of a dynasty she helped define. As we step into her world, prepare to confront a figure who defies easy judgment, a survivor who became a perpetrator, a queen whose brilliance was matched only by the darkness she unleashed. Her story is a haunting reminder that the most enduring legacies are often born not from glory, but from the quiet, devastating choices made in the shadows of trauma. Chapter 1. The Shattered Innocence of Arsinoe. In the heart of Alexandria, where the Nile's breath mingled with the salt of the Mediterranean, a city rose like a jewel from the sands of Egypt. Its streets thrummed with the voices of philosophers, the scratch of scribes' pens, and the clink of merchants' coins. The great lighthouse, a colossus of marble and fire, cast its beacon across the waves, guiding ships to a harbor that cradled the wealth of nations. Beneath the shadow of the library, where scrolls whispered secrets of the cosmos, Alexandria stood as a testament to human ambition, a place where gods and mortals seemed to walk hand in hand. Yet in the gilded halls of the Ptolemaic palace, where torchlight danced on walls adorned with hieroglyphs and Hellenic friezes, a darker story began to unfold. This was not a tale of scholars or conquerors, but of a girl whose innocence was forged in fire, her destiny shaped by the very hands that should have protected her. This was the story of Arsinoe, daughter of Ptolemy Soter, whose childhood would become a crucible for a queen. The year was 316 BCE, and the world was a cauldron of chaos. Alexander the Great, the god king who had bound east and west in his iron grip, was dead. His empire, vast as the heavens, had fractured like glass under the ambitions of his generals, the Diadochi, men whose hunger for power rivaled the sun's fire. Among them stood Ptolemy Soter, a Macedonian warrior with eyes like flint and a mind as sharp as a spear. He had claimed Egypt as his prize, planting his standard in Alexandria and declaring himself pharaoh, a living god. The Ptolemaic court was a strange alchemy of Macedonian steel and Egyptian mystique, where Greek philosophers debated beneath statues of Anubis, and incense-heavy rituals honored both Zeus and Osiris. Yet for all its splendor, the palace was a labyrinth of treachery, where loyalty was a currency spent sparingly, and love was a luxury none could afford. Arsinoe was born into this world, the daughter of Ptolemy and his wife Berenice, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her ambition. From her earliest days, Arsinoe's world was one of opulence and dread. The palace halls echoed with the laughter of courtiers and the screams of those who fell from favor. Servants whispered of poison slipped into wine, of daggers gleaming in the dark. To a child, the world beyond the palace walls was a distant dream, its wonders filtered through the bars of her gilded cage. Yet even within those walls, safety was an illusion. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh and betrayal, and Arsinoe, barely old enough to understand, learned to tread lightly. Her father, Ptolemy, was a colossus in her young eyes, a man who commanded armies and reshaped empires. His presence filled the room like a storm, his voice a low rumble that could soothe or terrify. To the court, he was a god-king, his every word law. To Arsinoe, he was something far more complex, a father whose love was a labyrinth of shadows. Ancient sources, veiled in euphemisms, speak of Ptolemy's excessive affection for his daughters, words that cloak a truth too horrific to name outright. Historians like Plutarch and Strabo, writing centuries later, hint at unspeakable acts within the Ptolemaic household, acts that even the hardened courts of the Hellenistic world found abhorrent. For Arsinoe, these were not mere rumors, but a reality that seeped into her bones, a violation that shattered the fragile trust of childhood. She was no more than a girl, her hair still falling in soft curls, her eyes wide with the wonder of a world she barely knew. Yet in the quiet hours of the night, when the palace slept and the stars watched in silence, Arsinoe learned that even a father's love could be a weapon. The details are lost to time, buried in the discretion of scribes who dared not write the full truth. But the echoes of that trauma lingered in her later actions, in the cold steel of her resolve, in the way she would one day wield power like a blade. The girl who should have been cherished was instead a pawn in a game of thrones, her body a currency in her father's quest for dominance. Arsinoe's world was one where daughters were not children, but assets, their royal blood a prize to be bartered or guarded. The Ptolemaic dynasty, foreign conquerors in an ancient land, clung to power through cunning and spectacle. They adopted Egyptian customs not out of reverence but necessity, weaving themselves into the fabric of a culture that revered its pharaohs as gods. Among these customs was the ancient practice of royal incest, a tradition rooted in the myths of Isis and Osiris, where sibling unions were seen as divine. For the Ptolemies, this was not piety, but strategy, a way to keep their bloodline pure, their power undiluted by foreign marriages. Yet what began as a political tool would become a poison, and Arsinoe, more than any other, would make it so. By the time she was 15, Arsinoe's innocence was a distant memory, replaced by a keen awareness of the court's brutal arithmetic. She had seen courtiers fall to whispered accusations, watched as her father's enemies vanished into the Nile's depths. She learned to read the flicker of a glance, the weight of a pause, the danger in a smile. Her mother, Berenice, was no comfort, a woman consumed by her own ambitions, her eyes fixed on the throne rather than her daughter's pain. Arsinoe was alone, a solitary figure navigating a world where every step could be her last. Her first marriage, arranged by her father, was to Lysimachus, a grizzled general whose years numbered thrice her own. He was a man of iron and paranoia, his face etched with the scars of battles and betrayals. To Ptolemy, the marriage was a strategic alliance, binding one of Alexander's successors to his dynasty. To Arsinoe, it was a sentence. Lysimachus's court in Thrace was a fortress of suspicion, its halls cold and unforgiving. He viewed his young bride not as a partner, but a vessel, a means to secure heirs and legitimize his claim. Arsinoe, barely more than a child, found herself traded from one cage to another, her father's violation replaced by a husband's indifference. Yet even in this bleak exile, Arsinoe's spirit did not break. She watched Lysimachus with the eyes of a hawk, noting his weaknesses, his fears, his enemies. She listened to the whispers of his courtiers, learned the names of those who could be bought or broken. When Lysimachus executed his own son on suspicion of treason, Arsinoe saw not just cruelty, but opportunity. Morality, she realized, was a chain that bound the weak. Power was the only currency that mattered. In the flickering torchlight of Thrace, she began to forge herself anew, not as a victim, but as a predator. Her marriage bore 3 sons, each a fragile hope in a world that devoured hope. For a fleeting moment, Arsinoe dared to dream of stability, of a life where her children might know the safety she had been denied. But the wars of the Diadochi were relentless, and Lysimachus fell in battle in 281 BCE, his blood staining the fields of Coropedium. Arsinoe, now a widow with 3 young sons, stood at a crossroads. She was a prize to be claimed, a threat to be neutralized. The generals who carved up her husband's kingdom eyed her with greed and fear, their ambitions as sharp as their swords. What happened next would etch Arsinoe's name into the annals of history, not as a victim, but as a force of nature. She did not wait for fate to decide her path. With a mind honed by years of survival, she wove a web of intrigue that would have made the gods themselves pause. She sent her sons to the safety of her half-brother, Ptolemy Ceraunus, now king of Macedon, a man whose volatility was matched only by his ambition. Then, in a move that stunned even the cynical courts of the Hellenistic world, she agreed to marry him. The marriage was a gamble, a dance on the edge of a blade. Ceraunus was a storm of a man, his temper as unpredictable as the sea. Arsinoe believed she could tame him, bend his will to hers. She was wrong. In a moment that would haunt her forever, Ceraunus murdered her 2 eldest sons before her eyes, their blood pooling on the marble floor as he declared them threats to his throne. The ancient sources speak of Arsinoe's reaction, not tears, not screams, but a silence so profound it chilled the air. She had learned long ago that weakness invited destruction. In that moment, something within her hardened, a final piece of her soul forged into unyielding steel. Arsinoe's escape from Ceraunus was a saga of cunning and courage. Disguised as a commoner, she fled through hostile lands, her path lit by the stars and paved with bribes and betrayals. She blackmailed those who could be swayed, eliminated those who could not. Every step was a gamble, every breath a defiance of the death that stalked her. When she reached Alexandria, she was no longer the girl who had left. She was a woman reborn, her heart a fortress, her mind a weapon. In the court of her brother, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, Arsinoe found a new stage for her ambitions. His marriage to Arsinoe was faltering, childless of male heirs and fraught with tension. Arsinoe saw her chance. With words as soft as silk and sharp as daggers, she wove a spell around her brother, drawing on their shared childhood, their shared scars. She did not merely accept his proposal to marry her. She orchestrated it, fabricating charges against his first wife to clear her path. In 276 BCE, they wed, a union that shocked the world not for its incest. Egypt had known such marriages for millennia, but for the audacity with which Arsinoe claimed her place as co-ruler. The girl who had once trembled in her father's shadow now stood as a queen, her face minted on coins, her name etched in decrees. She was no mere consort, she was Philadelphia, the sibling lover, a title she wore like armor. In the halls of Alexandria, Arsinoe began to reshape an empire, her policies, as bold as they were, ruthless. She reformed the tax system, binding Egypt's wealth to the crown. She reorganized the military, ensuring loyalty to her and her alone. And she institutionalized incest as state doctrine, a practice that would define and destroy the Ptolemaic dynasty. Yet even as she built her legacy, the seeds of ruin were sown. The trauma that had forged Arsinoe would not rest. It lingered in her cold calculations, in the policies that would poison her bloodline for generations. The girl who had suffered in silence had become a queen who spoke in decrees, but the cost of her survival was a dynasty doomed to decay. As the torches of Alexandria burned bright, casting their light across the Mediterranean, the shadows they hid grew ever darker, and Arsinoe, the architect of her own salvation, stood at the heart of a tragedy that would echo through the ages. Chapter 2, The Queen Who Wove Shadows. The sun hung low over Alexandria, its golden rays bathing the city in a deceptive glow of divinity. The great harbor pulsed with life ships laden with spices, silks, and secrets docked beneath the watchful gaze of the pharaohs, its beacon a defiant flame against the encroaching dusk. In the Ptolemaic palace, where marble gleamed and incense curled like whispers, Arsinoe too stood at the pinnacle of her power. No longer the trembling girl who had fled the blood-soaked halls of Macedon, she was now queen, co-ruler, and architect of a dynasty's destiny. Her marriage to her brother, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, had shocked the Hellenistic world, but it was merely the opening act of a drama that would redefine Egypt. With a mind as sharp as obsidian and a heart armored in scars, Arsinoe wove a tapestry of power, ambition, and trauma. A masterpiece that would both elevate and doom the Ptolemaic bloodline. The court of Alexandria was a crucible of intrigue, where every glance held a motive, every word a potential dagger. Arsinoe navigated this labyrinth with the grace of a serpent, her presence commanding silence in rooms filled with scheming nobles. Her face, now etched with the weight of her past, was a mask of regal composure, her eyes betraying nothing but a glint of steel. To the courtiers, she was Philadelphia, the sibling lover, a title that carried the weight of divine precedent and mortal scandal. To Ptolemy II, she was both partner and enigma, a woman who had seduced him not with beauty alone, but with the promise of an empire unyielding. Yet beneath her gilded exterior, Arsinoe bore the wounds of a childhood stolen, a mother's indifference and the blood of her son staining her memory. These wounds did not weaken her. They fueled her, driving her to build a legacy that would outlast her pain. Arsinoe's ascent to co-ruler was no accident. Her marriage to Ptolemy II, sealed in 276 BCE, was a calculated triumph, born from the ashes of his first wife's disgrace. Arsinoe, a gentle figure ill-suited to the cutthroat court, had been cast aside on fabricated charges of treason, charges whispered into existence by Arsinoe's own hand. The divorce was a masterstroke, clearing the path for her to claim not just Ptolemy's bed, but his throne. Coins minted in their reign bore their faces side by side, equal in prominence, a bold declaration of their shared rule. Decrees carried both their names, and temples rose to honor the sibling gods. Arsinoe did not merely rule beside her brother. She reshaped the very idea of what a queen could be. Her first act as co-ruler was to fortify Egypt's wealth. The Ptolemaic treasury, swollen with trade from the Mediterranean and beyond, was a prize coveted by rivals. Arsinoe, with her keen understanding of economics, reformed the tax system with ruthless efficiency. She streamlined collections, rooting out corruption among local officials, and ensured that every grain of wheat, every ingot of gold, flowed to Alexandria. Her reforms were not gentle villages that failed to meet quotas, faced the lash of her enforcers, but they filled the royal coffers, securing the dynasty's dominance. Merchants whispered her name with a mix of awe and fear, for Arsinoe was no distant monarch. She was a force who knew the value of every coin and the cost of every betrayal. The military, too, bent to her will. The Ptolemaic armies, a blend of Macedonian phalanxes and Egyptian levies, were loyal to the crown, but riddled with factions. Arsinoe, who had seen the chaos of the Diadochi Wars, understood that loyalty was a fragile thread. She purged disloyal generals, replacing them with men bound to her by gold or fear. She fortified garrisons along the Nile and secured trade routes to the Red Sea, ensuring that Egypt's wealth and its power remained unchallenged. Her reforms were not merely administrative, they were a statement. Arsinoe would not be a queen who cowered behind her brother's throne. She was a ruler in her own right, her will as unyielding as the desert sun. Yet it was in the realm of religion and propaganda that Arsinoe's genius shone brightest. The Ptolemies, as foreign conquerors, needed more than swords to hold Egypt. They needed divinity, drawing on the ancient Egyptian tradition of sibling marriage exemplified by Isis and Osiris. Arsinoe crafted a mythos that elevated her and Ptolemy II to living gods. She established a cult in their honor, with priests chanting prayers to the sibling gods in temples adorned with their likenesses. Festivals celebrated their union, with processions of dancers and musicians weaving through Alexandria's streets, their songs proclaiming the divine love of Philadelphia. Art and poetry, commissioned by Arsinoe's hand, depicted their marriage as a sacred bond, a union blessed by the gods themselves. To the people, it was a spectacle of awe. To Arsinoe, it was a weapon, transforming taboo into sanctity. This institutionalization of incest was her most enduring and destructive legacy. Arsinoe did not merely marry her brother. She made sibling marriage a cornerstone of Ptolemaic policy. Future rulers would be expected to wed within the family, preferably siblings. To keep the royal blood pure, the justification was twofold. Religiously, it aligned the Ptolemies with Egyptian gods, reinforcing their divine claim to the throne. Politically, it prevented foreign princes from gaining a foothold through marriage. Arsinoe's logic was impeccable, her execution flawless. Yet beneath the grandeur of her propaganda, a poison was taking root. The practice of incest, combined with the Ptolemaic penchant for eliminating rivals within the family, created a dynasty destined to decay. Arsinoe's policies brought immediate prosperity. Alexandria flourished as a beacon of learning, its library swelling with scrolls from across the known world. Scholars like Euclid and Eratosthenes walked its halls, their work funded by the wealth Arsinoe's reforms secured. Trade routes to India and Ethiopia brought spices, ivory, and gold, making Egypt the envy of the Mediterranean. For a time, it seemed Arsinoe had achieved the impossible, a stable, prosperous empire built on the ashes of her own suffering. Yet even in this golden moment, the shadows of her past loomed large. Her relationship with Ptolemy the Reunion was a complex dance of power and pain. To the court, they were the perfect divine couple, their unity a symbol of Egypt's strength. But in private, their bond was fraught with tension. Ptolemy, a man of ambition but lesser resolve, grew increasingly dependent on his sister wife. Arsinoe, ever the strategist, used this to her advantage, guiding his decisions with a subtle hand. Yet their shared childhood, the trauma they both endured under their father's roof cast a pall over their marriage. Ancient sources hint at moments of discord, of Ptolemy's growing unease at Arsinoe's dominance. Court observers noted that the sibling gods rarely appeared together in public, their interactions marked by a palpable strain. Some whispered that Arsinoe, ever pragmatic, may have begun to poison her brother husband, though such claims remain speculative. shrouded in the fog of history. Arsinoe's personal life was a fortress of solitude. The loss of her sons at the hands of Coronis had left a wound that never healed, a grief she buried beneath layers of calculation. Her surviving son Ptolemy was kept at a distance, raised by trusted allies to shield him from the court's dangers. Arsinoe trusted no one fully, not her brother, not her allies, nor even herself. A letter from this period, written to a young female relative, reveals the depth of her isolation. Love and trust are luxuries we cannot afford. Even family, especially family, must be managed carefully. The words penned in her elegant hand are a chilling testament to a woman who had learned to see every bond as a potential betrayal. Her influence extended beyond the palace walls, reshaping Egyptian society. The Ptolemaic court, under her guidance, became a hothouse of ambition and perversion. Courtiers, eager to emulate their rulers, adopted the moral flexibility Arsinoe embodied. Traditional values eroded as loyalty gave way to opportunism and trust dissolved into suspicion. The religious institutions, once pillars of Egyptian culture, bent to Arsinoe's will. Priests, dependent on royal patronage, crafted theological justifications for the sibling marriage, their voices trembling as they spoke of divine precedent. This corruption of faith sowed seeds of doubt among the people, weakening the spiritual foundations that had sustained Egypt for millennia. The consequences of Arsinoe's policies were already visible in her lifetime. Her brother husband's health began to falter, his once robust frame weakened by excess and, perhaps, by the toxins of a court where poison was as common as wine. The next generation, born of incestuous unions, showed early signs of the decay that would plague the Ptolemies. Ptolemy III, Arsinoe's stepson and eventual heir, was a capable ruler, but whispers of instability, both physical and mental, began to circulate. The court, once a center of brilliance, grew darker, its intrigues more vicious, its cruelties more brazen. Arsinoe herself remained untouchable, her power absolute. She spoke 9 languages, corresponded with philosophers and debated scholars in the library's halls. Her intellect was a beacon, drawing the brightest minds to Alexandria. Yet her brilliance was inseparable from her darkness. Every reform, every decree bore the mark of her trauma, a trauma she had not overcome but harnessed. She had learned as a child that survival requires sacrifice, and she had sacrificed everything. Her innocence, her sons, her humanity. In their place, she built an empire, but at a cost she could not yet fathom. As her reign progressed, Arsinoe's isolation deepened. She walked the palace alone, her footsteps echoing in halls that once rang with her laughter. The courtiers who flocked to her were allies, not friends. The priests who praised her were pawns, not believers. Even Ptolemy Sut, bound to her by blood and marriage, was a partner in power, not love. The girl who had once dreamed of safety had become a queen who trusted only her own cunning. Her policies, so meticulously crafted, were a reflection of her inner world, a place where love was a liability and power the only truth. By 270 BCE, when Arsinoe's life drew to a close, she had achieved what she set out to do. Egypt was prosperous, its borders secure, its rulers deified. Temples rose in her honor, their altars heavy with offerings to the sibling gods. Yet even in death, she remained a figure of controversy. Graffiti scrawled on Alexandria's walls mocked the sister wife, questioning whether the gods truly blessed such a union. The people, dazzled by her propaganda, whispered of her ruthlessness, her ambition, her pain. Arsinoe's death marked the end of an era, but not the end of her legacy. The system she built rooted in incest, ambition, and trauma would endure, shaping the Ptolemaic dynasty for centuries. Each generation would bear the weight of her choices, their bodies and minds weakened by the very policies she had made law. The brilliance of Alexandria would fade, its library reduced to ashes, its rulers to shadows. And at the heart of it all stood Arsinoe, a woman who had turned her suffering into a throne, her pain into a dynasty, her trauma into a tragedy that would echo through time. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Legacy. The air in Alexandria was heavy with the scent of lotus blossoms and ambition, a city where the dreams of mortals mingled with the whispers of gods. The great library scrolls multiplied like stars, their wisdom a beacon for scholars across the Mediterranean. The pharaoh's lighthouse stood defiant against the sea, its fire a symbol of Ptolemaic might. Yet within the palace, where Arsinoe the New reigned as co-ruler with her brother husband, Ptolemy II in Philadelphus, a shadow grew, a shadow cast not by enemies abroad, but by the very policies that had secured their throne. Arsinoe, once a girl broken by her father's cruelty, had forged herself into a queen of iron. Her brilliance had transformed Egypt, but her legacy was a poison seeping into the blood of her dynasty, a curse that would outlive her and haunt the Ptolemies for generations. Arsinoe's reign was a paradox of triumph and tragedy. Her reforms had turned Alexandria into a crucible of wealth and knowledge. The tax system she had reshaped funneled gold into the royal treasury, funding fleets that dominated the seas and armies that quelled rebellion. Her reorganization of the military had rooted out disloyalty, binding soldiers to the crown with oaths and rewards. But it was her boldest act, the institutionalization of sibling marriage, that defined her rule. By declaring herself and Ptolemy II's Philadelphia, the sibling lovers, she had woven their union into the fabric of Egyptian divinity, aligning the Ptolemies with the gods Isis and Osiris. Temples rose in their honor, their walls adorned with reliefs of the divine couple, their altars thick with offerings. Festivals filled Alexandria's streets with music and fervor, proclaiming the sacred bond of the sibling gods. To the people, it was a spectacle of awe. To Arsinoe, it was a calculated act of power. Yet beneath the grandeur, the seeds of ruin were taking root. The practice of incest, once a strategic tool to keep the royal bloodline pure, was a double-edged sword. Arsinoe's policies ensured that no foreign prince could claim Egypt's throne through marriage, but they also confined the Ptolemies to a genetic prison. The ancient Egyptians had practiced sibling unions for millennia, but the Ptolemies, with their Macedonian vigor and unrelenting ambition, pushed the practice to its limits. Each marriage within the family tightened the noose, narrowing the bloodline's diversity and planting the seeds of decay. Arsinoe, with her piercing intellect, must have understood the risks, but her worldview forged in the crucible of her own trauma saw survival as a game of control, not compromise. To her, the purity of the Ptolemaic line was worth any price, even one paid by future generations. The court of Alexandria, under Arsinoe's influence, became a mirror of her inner world, a place of brilliance and cruelty, where loyalty was a transaction and love a liability. Courtiers, eager to curry favor, mimicked the moral ambiguity of their rulers. Traditional Egyptian values, honor, kinship, piety eroded as ambition, became the currency of the palace. Priests, once guardians of ancient wisdom, bent to Arsinoe's will, crafting theological justifications for practices they privately abhorred. The cult of the sibling gods, with its lavish rituals and grandiose propaganda, was a masterstroke of control, but it came at a cost. The people, dazzled by the spectacle, began to question the divine aura of their rulers. Graffiti appeared on Alexandria's walls, crude verses mocking the sister wife, whispering doubts about the gods' approval. Arsinoe, ever vigilant, silenced such dissent with a swift hand, but the cracks in her carefully constructed facade were beginning to show. Her relationship with Ptolemy grew increasingly strained as their reign progressed. The man who had once been her partner in ambition became a shadow of himself, his health faltering under the weight of excess and the subtle poisons of court life. Ancient sources hint at Arsinoe's growing dominance, her voice carrying more weight than his in matters of state. Ptolemy, a man of charm but lesser resolve, leaned heavily on his sister wife, his decisions shaped by her unyielding will. Yet their shared past, the trauma of their childhood under Ptolemy, their roof cast a pall over their union. They were bound by blood and ambition, but trust was a fragile thing. Court observers noted their rare public appearances together, the tension between them palpable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Whispers circulated that Arsinoe, ever pragmatic, might have turned to poison to secure her power, though such claims remain shrouded in speculation. What is certain is that Ptolemy's dependence on her grew, even as their bond frayed, a marriage of divine pretense, masking a partnership of necessity. Arsinoe's personal life was a fortress of solitude. The loss of her sons to Ptolemy Ceraunus's blade had left a wound that no crown could heal. Her surviving son, Ptolemy, was raised in the shadows, protected by trusted allies, but kept at a distance from the court's dangers. Arsinoe trusted no one, not her brother, not her courtiers, not even herself. Her letters from this period, preserved in fragments, reveal a woman of chilling pragmatism. To a young niece, she wrote, "Family is a battlefield, not a refuge. Guard your heart, for it will betray you." These words, etched in her elegant script, were a testament to a soul forged in betrayal, a queen who had learned that survival demanded the sacrifice of all that was human. The immediate effects of Arsinoe's policies were undeniable. Egypt flourished, its ports bustling with trade, its scholars pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. The Library of Alexandria, under her patronage, became a beacon for the world's greatest minds. Poets sang of her wisdom, philosophers sought her counsel, and merchants bowed to her economic acumen. Yet beneath this glittering surface, the dynasty was beginning to rot. The first signs of decay appeared in the next generation. Ptolemy III, the son of Ptolemy II by his first wife, inherited a stable throne, but bore the weight of his parents' legacy. Ancient sources describe him as capable, but haunted by the instability that would come to define his descendants. Whispers of physical ailments, subtle deformities, unexplained illnesses began to circulate. The earliest hints of the genetic toll of incest. The court, too, grew darker under Arsinoe's influence. The culture of intrigue she fostered became a breeding ground for cruelty. Courtiers, imitating their queen, turned on one another with increasing ferocity. Poisonings became commonplace, alliances shifted with the wind, and loyalty was a mask worn lightly. The Ptolemaic palace, once a center of brilliance, became a hothouse of perversion, where normal human bonds were twisted into instruments of power. The psychological toll was profound. Children raised in this environment, potential heirs and rivals alike, learned from infancy that family was both their greatest ally and their deadliest threat. The paranoia that had shaped Arsinoe's worldview became a self-fulfilling prophecy, passed down through the generations like a curse. The religious implications of Arsinoe's policies were equally devastating. By claiming divine status, the Ptolemies had bound their rule to the spiritual fabric of Egypt. Yet their practices, incest, murder, betrayal, undermined the very institutions they claimed to uphold. Priests, forced to justify the sibling gods, grew cynical, their faith eroded by the demands of royal patronage. The people, once devoted to their pharaohs, began to waver, their trust shaken by the moral decay of the court. This crisis of faith would have far-reaching consequences, making Egypt vulnerable to foreign influences, including the rise of Christianity centuries later. As Arsinoe's life drew to a close, the weight of her choices became impossible to ignore. She was a woman of staggering intellect, her mind a labyrinth of strategy and foresight. She spoke 9 languages, corresponded with the greatest scholars of her age, and wielded power with a precision that rivaled any king. Yet her brilliance was inseparable from her darkness. The trauma of her childhood, her father's abuse, her son's murder, had not broken her but reshaped her, turning her into a woman who saw the world as a battlefield and herself as its general. Her policies, born of that trauma, were a reflection of her inner war, a desperate attempt to control a world that had once controlled her. In 270 BCE, Arsinoe's life ended, her body laid to rest with the honors of a goddess. Temples were built in her name, their altars heavy with offerings to the sister wife who had redefined Egypt. Yet even in death she remained a figure of controversy. The graffiti that marred Alexandria's walls grew bolder, its verses questioning the divinity of a queen who had built her throne on taboo. The people, awed by her power, whispered of her ruthlessness, her ambition, her pain. Arsinoe had achieved what she set out to do. She had survived, she had ruled, she had left a mark that would endure. But the cost was a dynasty poisoned from within, its bloodline weakened, its spirit corrupted. The generations that followed bore the scars of Arsinoe's legacy. Ptolemy III, for all his competence, could not escape the shadow of his parents' choices. His successors, Ptolemy IV, Ptolemy V, and beyond, showed increasing signs of instability. Physical deformities, mental fragility, and a penchant for cruelty marked the Ptolemaic line, each ruler more damaged than the last. By the time of Cleopatra VII, the dynasty was a hollow shell, its rulers weakened by inbreeding and consumed by fratricidal conflict. Modern genetic studies of Ptolemaic mummies confirm the toll. Hemophilia, scoliosis, and other disorders ran rampant, a testament to the biological price of Arsinoe's vision. The fall of the Ptolemies was not the work of Rome alone. It was the culmination of a tragedy set in motion centuries earlier, when a young girl learned that survival required sacrifice. Arsinoe's policies had ensured Egypt's strength in her lifetime, but they had also sown the seeds of its destruction. The Library of Alexandria, once a symbol of human potential, would burn. The pharaohs would crumble, and Egypt, the jewel of the Mediterranean, would fall to Roman ambition. Cleopatra's alliances with Caesar and Antony were desperate attempts to shore up a dynasty rotting from within, a legacy of Arsinoe's making. In the end, Arsinoe's story is not just a tale of ancient power, but a warning etched in blood. She was a victim who became a perpetrator, a queen who turned her pain into policy. Her intelligence, her resilience, her ambition could have reshaped the world for good, but her trauma twisted her path, leading her to build a dynasty on a foundation of decay. As the torches of Alexandria flickered in the night, they cast long shadows, hiding the truth of a queen whose legacy was both her triumph and her curse, a poison that would linger in the blood of Egypt for centuries. Chapter 4. The Echoes of a Fallen Dynasty. The winds of Alexandria carried the scent of salt and sorrow, whispering through the marble corridors of a palace that had once pulsed with divine ambition. The city, a beacon of human ingenuity, stood as a monument to the Ptolemaic dream. Its library brimming with the world's wisdom, its lighthouse defying the sea's embrace. Yet beneath this radiant facade, the dynasty forged by Arsinoe II was unraveling, its foundations eroded by the very policy she had etched into its soul. Her reign as co-ruler with Ptolemy II Philadelphus had been a triumph of intellect and will, transforming Egypt into a powerhouse of wealth and culture. But the price of her vision, a system built on incest, ambition, and unhealed trauma, was now exacting its toll. The Ptolemaic bloodline, once a symbol of divine purity, was a poisoned chalice, its heirs bearing the scars of Arsinoe's choices. As the dynasty staggered toward its twilight, her legacy echoed through the ages, a haunting reminder of how personal pain could reshape a civilization. Arsinoe's death in 270 BCE marked the end of her physical presence, but her shadow loomed large over Egypt. Deified in death, she was enshrined as a goddess, her image carved into temple walls, her name chanted in hymns that reverberated through Alexandria's sacred precincts. The cult of the sibling gods, which she had meticulously crafted, continued to bind the Ptolemies to the divine, their rule legitimized by the mythos of Isis and Osiris. Yet the cracks she had ignored in life were now fissures, threatening to swallow the dynasty whole. The practice of sibling marriage, her most enduring policy, had been designed to safeguard Ptolemaic power, but it was a Pandora's box, unleashing a cascade of genetic and psychological decay that no amount of propaganda could conceal. Ptolemy III Euergetes, the son of Ptolemy II by his first wife, inherited a throne bolstered by Arsinoe's reforms. He was a capable ruler, his reign marked by military victories and cultural patronage that expanded Alexandria's influence. The library grew under his care, its shelves groaning with scrolls from distant lands, while the city's ports welcomed ships laden with treasures from India to Iberia. Yet even in this golden age, the signs of decline were unmistakable. Ptolemy III's health, though robust in youth, began to falter, and court whispers spoke of ailments that defied the physician's art. His children, born of his marriage to his cousin, Berenice II, carried the first faint traces of the Ptolemaic curse subtle deformities, a fragility that hinted at the genetic toll of Arsinoe's doctrine. The court, too, bore the mark of Arsinoe's influence. The culture of intrigue she had fostered had taken root, transforming the palace into a nest of vipers. Courtiers, trained in her school of cunning, wove webs of deceit, their loyalty as fleeting as the Nile's floods. Poisonings, once rare, became a grim ritual, with chalices of wine and platters of figs serving as silent executioners. The paranoia that had defined Arsinoe's worldview now infected the entire court, each noble eyeing the other as a potential traitor. Children of the royal family, raised in this crucible of suspicion, learned to see their siblings as both spouses and rivals, their hearts torn between love and fear. The psychological toll was profound, creating a generation of rulers whose instability would rival the tempests of the Mediterranean. Ptolemy, therefore, Philopator, the son of Ptolemy III, was the first to fully embody the decay Arsinoe had unwittingly sown. His reign was a descent into debauchery and cruelty, his court a carnival of excess. Ancient sources paint a vivid picture of a man whose appetites knew no bounds, feasts that lasted days, orgies that scandalized even the jaded Hellenistic world, and a temper that turned on a whim. His sister wife, Arsinoe III, was a tragic figure, her intelligence and compassion overshadowed by her brother's volatility. Their marriage, a continuation of Arsinoe II's policy, produced a son, Ptolemy III, but the union was marked by strife. Arsinoe III's murder, allegedly at the hands of Ptolemy IV's courtiers, sent shockwaves through the palace, a stark reminder of the dynasty's descent into fratricidal madness. The genetic consequences of Arsinoe's policies were becoming undeniable. Modern analyses of Ptolemaic mummies reveal a litany of ailments: hemophilia, scoliosis, clubbed feet, and other disorders born of a bloodline too tightly bound. Ptolemy IV's obesity and erratic behavior suggest a mind and body strained by inbreeding. His cruelty a twisted echo of the trauma that had shaped Arsinoe II. His son, Ptolemy I Epiphanes, ascended the throne as a child, his reign plagued by regents and rebellions. The dynasty's stability, so carefully crafted by Arsinoe, was crumbling, its rulers weakened by the very purity she had sought to preserve. The cultural impact of Arsinoe's legacy was equally profound. The Ptolemaic court, once a center of intellectual brilliance, had become a caricature of itself. The moral rot she had normalized spread like a plague, infecting every level of society. Courtiers, eager to emulate their rulers, embraced a culture of opportunism and betrayal, where honor was a relic and power the only god. The religious institutions, once the bedrock of Egyptian identity, were complicit in this decay. Priests, bound by royal patronage, continued to preach the divinity of the sibling gods, but their words rang hollow. The people, once awestruck by their pharaohs, grew restless, their faith eroded by the excesses of a dynasty that seemed more mortal than divine. By the time of Ptolemy the Eighth Physcon, the dynasty's decline was stark. His grotesque obesity and paranoia were legendary, his reign marked by the murder of his own son and the exile of his sister wife, Cleopatra the. The court had become a battleground, its halls echoing with the screams of the betrayed. The practice of sibling marriage, now a grim tradition, produced rulers whose physical and mental frailties were impossible to ignore. Coins from this era, once bearing the proud profiles of Arsinoe II and Ptolemy II, now depicted faces marked by pronounced features, hooked noses, protruding chins, hints of the genetic toll of inbreeding. The psychological damage was perhaps even more devastating. Growing up in a world where siblings were both lovers and potential assassins created a generation of rulers consumed by paranoia. Trust, the foundation of any family, was a luxury the Ptolemies could not afford. Children learned from infancy to guard their hearts, to see every smile as a potential threat. This mindset, rooted in Arsinoe's own trauma, became a self-fulfilling prophecy, each generation more willing to kill their kin to secure the throne. The court became a microcosm of her inner world, a place where love was a weapon and survival demanded the sacrifice of all that was human. The broader implications of Arsinoe's policies were felt beyond the palace walls. Egypt, once a bastion of strength, grew vulnerable as its rulers weakened. The Roman Republic, its eagles circling, saw opportunity in the Ptolemaic dysfunction. By the time of Cleopatra VII, the dynasty was a shadow of its former self. Her beauty, immortalized in legend, was likely a product of propaganda, her coins revealing features shaped by generations of inbreeding. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were desperate gambits to bolster a throne that was crumbling from within. The fall of Alexandria in 30 BCE, when Octavian's legions marched through its gates, was not merely a military defeat, but the culmination of a tragedy set in motion centuries earlier by Arsinoe II. Arsinoe's legacy was a paradox, a testament to her brilliance and a monument to her pain. She had survived the unthinkable, transforming herself from a victim into a queen who reshaped an empire. Her reforms had brought prosperity, her propaganda divinity, her cunning survival. Yet the system she built was a house of cards, its foundations rotted by the very policies she had championed. The Ptolemaic dynasty did not fall to foreign swords alone. It collapsed under the weight of its own decay, a dynasty poisoned by the trauma of its most influential queen. In the centuries that followed, Alexandria's glory faded. The library burned, its wisdom scattered to the winds. The pharaohs crumbled, its light extinguished. Egypt, once the jewel of the Mediterranean, became a province of Rome, its pharaohs reduced to memory. Yet Arsinoe's story endured, a cautionary tale etched in the annals of history. She was a woman of staggering intellect, her mind a labyrinth of strategy and foresight. She spoke 9 languages, corresponded with philosophers, and wielded power with a precision that rivaled any king. But her brilliance was inseparable from her darkness, her policies a reflection of a soul scarred by abuse. Modern historians grapple with the complexity of Arsinoe's legacy. Was she a victim driven by the horrors of her childhood to create a system that mirrored her pain? Or was she a perpetrator, a woman who chose to institutionalize the very abuses that had broken her. Feminist scholars argue that she was a product of her time, a woman navigating an impossible patriarchal world with limited choices. Her agency, they contend, was a triumph, her survival a testament to her strength. Yet this view risks minimizing the harm she caused. The generations of Ptolemies who suffered under the weight of her policies, the courtiers corrupted by her example, the people whose faith was eroded by her propaganda. Others see Arsinoe as a case study in the dangers of unhealed trauma. Her story illustrates how personal pain, when given power, can metastasize into societal decay. The psychological profile that emerges from her life is chilling. A woman of emotional detachment, incapable of forming healthy bonds, driven to recreate the abusive dynamics of her childhood on a civilizational scale. Unlike many perpetrators, she acted not in denial but with full awareness, crafting elaborate justifications for her policies and building systems to ensure their endurance. This self-awareness makes her actions all the more disturbing, a testament to the human capacity to rationalize even the darkest choices. As the ruins of Alexandria stand today, silent beneath the weight of centuries, they bear witness to a psychological tragedy that played out across generations. Tourists walk among the shattered columns, unaware of the story they tread upon, a story of a girl who survived, a queen who ruled, and a dynasty that fell. Arsinoe II's legacy is not just the rise and fall of an empire, but a warning about the power of trauma to shape history. Her policies, born of pain, created a dynasty that was both brilliant and broken, a monument to the human capacity for survival and destruction. In the end, Arsinoe achieved what she set out to do. She survived the horrors of her childhood, claimed a throne, and left a mark that echoed through time. But the cost was a dynasty doomed to decay, a civilization weakened by the very policies that had made it strong. Her story asks us to confront uncomfortable truths about the line between victim and perpetrator, about the power of trauma to shape systems, and about the human capacity to turn pain into power. As the winds of Alexandria whisper through the ruins, they carry the echoes of a queen whose triumph was her tragedy, a woman who wove a legacy that was both her salvation and her curse. Chapter 5. The Final Reckoning. The sun sank into the Mediterranean, painting Alexandria's horizon with hues of blood and gold. The city, once the heart of a world-spanning dream, stood as a fading monument to Ptolemaic ambition. Its streets still thrummed with the chatter of merchants and the musings of scholars, but an air of unease hung over the palace, where the legacy of Arsinoe lingered like a specter. Her policies, forged in the crucible of her own trauma, had reshaped Egypt, turning it into a beacon of wealth and wisdom. Yet they had also sown a poison that now coursed through the veins of her dynasty, weakening its rulers and eroding its foundations. As the Ptolemaic line staggered toward its end, the echoes of Arsinoe's choices reverberated, a haunting requiem for a dynasty that had burned too brightly to endure. This was the final reckoning, a tale of how a queen's triumph became a civilization's tragedy. The years following Arsinoe's death in 270 BCE were a slow unraveling, each generation bearing the weight of her institutionalized trauma. The practice of sibling marriage, her most enduring legacy, had been designed to preserve the purity of the Ptolemaic bloodline, but it was a chain that bound the dynasty to its doom. The genetic toll was evident in the frail bodies and troubled minds of her descendants, while the psychological scars, paranoia, betrayal, and a worldview steeped in suspicion defined the court. Alexandria, the city she had helped elevate to unparalleled heights, was now a stage for a tragedy that would play out across centuries, its final act approaching with the inevitability of a storm. Ptolemy Victor of Epiphanes, who ascended the throne as a child in 204 BCE, was a stark symbol of the dynasty's decline. His reign was marked by chaos rebellions in Upper Egypt, encroaching Roman influence, and a court fractured by regents vying for power. His marriage to Cleopatra the Marriage, a Seleucid princess, briefly deviated from Arsinoe's doctrine of sibling unions, but the damage was already done. The Ptolemaic bloodline, narrowed by generations of inbreeding, produced rulers whose physical and mental frailties were impossible to conceal. Ptolemy's early death at 29, possibly by poison, was a grim echo of the court's descent into fratricidal madness, a legacy traceable to Arsinoe's vision of a pure dynasty. The reign of Ptolemy VI and Philometor, Ptolemy's son, was a flicker of hope in a darkening lineage. A thoughtful ruler, he sought to stabilize Egypt through diplomacy, forging alliances with Rome to counter its growing threat. Yet his marriage to his sister Cleopatra II reaffirmed Arsinoe's policy, binding the dynasty to its self-inflicted curse. Their children, born of this union, bore the hallmarks of inbreeding physical deformities and a predisposition to instability that would plague their reigns. The court, once a crucible of intellectual brilliance, had become a battleground of ambition and betrayal. Sibling rivalries turned deadly, with Cleopatra and her brother husband locked in a power struggle that culminated in Ptolemy VI's death in battle in 145 BCE. The dynasty, once a pillar of strength, was crumbling under the weight of its own design. By the time of Ptolemy VIII Physcon, the rot was undeniable. His grotesque obesity and paranoia were the stuff of legend, his reign a carnival of cruelty. Married to Cleopatra II, his sister, and later to her daughter Cleopatra III, he perpetuated the cycle of incest and violence that Arsinoe had normalized. His murder of his own son, a potential rival, was a chilling echo of the bloodshed that had marked Arsinoe's life, her son slaughtered by Ptolemy Cyrenius, her heart hardened by loss. Ptolemy VI's court was a mirror of Arsinoe's, where trust was a myth and power the only truth. The people of Alexandria, once awed by their divine rulers, grew restive, their faith eroded by the excesses of a dynasty that seemed more monstrous than godlike. The cultural and religious fallout of Arsinoe's policies was profound. The cult of the sibling gods, which she had crafted with such precision, had once unified Egypt under a divine narrative. Now it was a hollow ritual, its priests reciting prayers with cynical tongues. The Egyptian populace, steeped in a tradition that revered its pharaohs, began to question the divinity of rulers who wallowed in debauchery and betrayal. The moral decay of the court spread like a contagion, infecting the administration with corruption and inefficiency. Governors hoarded wealth, soldiers grew lax, and the once mighty Ptolemaic navy faltered against pirate fleets. Egypt, the jewel of the Mediterranean, was vulnerable, its strength sapped by the very policies that had once made it invincible. The final act of the Ptolemaic tragedy was played out by Cleopatra VII, the last and most famous of Arsinoe's heirs. Ascending the throne in 51 BCE, she was a woman of dazzling intellect and charisma, her name synonymous with allure and ambition. Yet she was also a product of Arsinoe's legacy, her bloodline weakened by centuries of inbreeding. Coins from her reign reveal a face with pronounced features, hooked nose, strong jaw, likely a result of genetic narrowing. Her marriages to her brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIII, were grim continuations of Arsinoe's doctrine, their reigns marked by civil war and fratricide. Cleopatra's alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were desperate bids to shore up a dynasty that was rotting from within, its rulers too frail to stand alone. Cleopatra's brilliance could not save the Ptolemies. Her defeat at Actium in 31 BCE and the fall of Alexandria to Octavian's legions in 30 BCE marked the end of Egypt's independence. As she took her own life, the aspie's venom a final act of defiance, the Ptolemaic dynasty collapsed, its legacy reduced to ruins. The library, once the heart of human knowledge, would burn. The pharaohs, a beacon of Ptolemaic might, would crumble. Egypt, the cradle of civilization, became a Roman province, its pharaohs relegated to myth. The fall was not merely a military conquest, but the culmination of a tragedy set in motion by Arsinoe I, whose policies had poisoned the dynasty's blood and soul. Arsinoe's legacy was a paradox of triumph and destruction. She had survived the unthinkable, a childhood marred by her father's abuse, marriages that were prisons, and the murder of her sons. With a mind sharper than any blade, she had reshaped Egypt, turning it into a powerhouse of wealth and culture. Her reforms had filled the treasury, her military purges had secured the throne, and her propaganda had deified her rule. Yet the system she built was a house built on sand, its foundations eroded by the very policies she had championed. The incest she institutionalized, meant to preserve power, had instead weakened the dynasty, producing rulers whose bodies and minds buckled under the weight of their lineage. The psychological toll of Arsinoe's legacy was as devastating as the genetic. The court she shaped was a crucible of paranoia, where siblings were both lovers and enemies, and trust was a death sentence. This mindset, born of her own trauma, became the dynasty's defining trait, each generation more consumed by suspicion and violence. Modern psychology recognizes the patterns in Arsinoe's life: emotional detachment, a tendency to recreate abusive dynamics, a worldview that saw all relationships as transactions of power. Her awareness of her actions, her deliberate choice to institutionalize harmful practices, makes her legacy all the more chilling. She was not a victim acting in ignorance, but a strategist who built a system that perpetuated her pain. The broader implications of Arsinoe's reign extend beyond the fall of the Ptolemies. Her story is a case study in how personal trauma can shape political systems, a warning about the dangers of power wielded by those who have not healed their wounds. The Ptolemaic court, with its culture of betrayal and excess, prefigures modern regimes where leaders, driven by personal demons, normalize violence and corruption. The cycle of abuse that Arsinoe perpetuated, victim becoming perpetrator, resonates in contemporary discussions of generational trauma, illustrating how pain, left unaddressed, can metastasize into societal decay. Historians grapple with how to judge Arsinoe. Was she a victim forced by a patriarchal world to make impossible choices? Feminist scholars argue that her agency was a triumph, her survival a testament to her resilience in a world that offered women little power. She spoke 9 languages, corresponded with philosophers, and governed with a mastery that rivaled any king. Yet this view risks glossing over the harm she caused, the generations of Ptolemies who suffered under her policies, the courtiers corrupted by her example, the people whose faith was shattered by her propaganda. Others see her as a cautionary tale, a reminder that trauma, when given power, can reshape civilizations in its image. The ruins of Alexandria, silent beneath the weight of centuries, bear witness to this tragedy. Tourists wander among the shattered columns, unaware of the story they tread upon, a story of a girl who survived, a queen who ruled, in a dynasty that fell. Arsinoe's legacy is not just the rise and fall of an empire, but a meditation on the human capacity for both creation and destruction. Her intelligence, her ambition, her pain could have been forces for good, but they were twisted by a world that offered her no refuge. She built a dynasty on the ashes of her suffering, but in doing so, she ensured its doom. As the Mediterranean winds whisper through Alexandria's ruins, they carry the echoes of Arsinoe's life, a life of brilliance in darkness, of triumph in tragedy. Her story challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about the line between victim and perpetrator, about the power of trauma to shape history, and about the human capacity to turn pain into policy. She achieved what she set out to do. She survived, she ruled, she left a mark that endured. But the cost was a dynasty that rotted from within, a civilization that fell not to swords but to the poison of its own blood. In the end, Arsinoe's tale is a requiem for lost potential. The girl who might have been a beacon of wisdom became a queen who wove a legacy of decay. Her policies, born of trauma, created a dynasty that was both magnificent and monstrous, a testament to the human capacity to endure and destroy. As we stand among the ruins of her world, we are left with a final, chilling thought. Arsinoe succeeded by every metric she valued: survival, power, legacy. That this success came atop a pyre of broken lives in a fallen empire might not have troubled her. After all, she had learned long ago that survival demanded everything, even the future. Chapter 6. The Ashes of Alexandria. The twilight of Alexandria was a quiet lament, its once dazzling streets cloaked in the dust of a fading era. The Mediterranean lapped at the city's edges, its waves whispering secrets of a time when the Ptolemies reigned as gods. The great library, a vault of human knowledge, stood as a monument to their ambition, while the Pharos lighthouse, its flame now flickering, cast a weary glow across a harbor grown silent. The dynasty forged by Arsinoe II, with its intoxicating blend of brilliance and brutality, was nearing its end. Her policies, born of trauma, ambition, and a relentless will to survive, had elevated Egypt to unparalleled heights, but they had also sown the seeds of its destruction. As the final act of the Ptolemaic tragedy unfolded, the city that had once been the world's beacon stood on the brink of surrender, its fate a testament to the enduring power of a queen's choices. This was the story of Alexandria's fall, a requiem for a dynasty consumed by the poison of its own making. The centuries since Arsinoe's death in 270 BCE had been a slow descent, each generation of Ptolemies bearing the scars of her legacy. Her institutionalization of sibling marriage, designed to preserve the dynasty's divine purity, had instead become its curse. The genetic toll was evident in the frail bodies and troubled minds of her descendants, while the psychological damage, paranoia, betrayal, and a worldview steeped in suspicion had turned the court into a crucible of cruelty. The policies that had once secured Egypt's wealth and power now undermined its stability, leaving it vulnerable to the rising tide of Rome. Arsinoe's vision, so meticulously crafted, had created a dynasty that was both magnificent and monstrous, a glittering edifice built on a foundation of decay. The reign of Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic ruler, was the final chapter in this saga of ambition and ruin. Ascending the throne in 51 BCE, at the age of 18, she was a woman of staggering intellect and charisma, her name destined to echo through history. She spoke 9 languages, like Arsinoe before her, and her court was a magnet for poets, scholars, and statesmen. Yet she was also a product of Arsinoe's legacy, her bloodline weakened by centuries of inbreeding. Coins from her reign reveal a face with sharp, pronounced features, hooked nose, strong jaw, likely a result of genetic narrowing. Her marriages to her brothers, Ptolemy X and Ptolemy XIII, were grim continuations of Arsinoe's doctrine, their reigns marked by civil war and fratricide. Cleopatra's brilliance was undeniable, but she inherited a throne that was crumbling, its foundations eroded by the very policies that had once made it strong. Cleopatra's early reign was a desperate struggle for survival. The Ptolemaic court, steeped in the paranoia and intrigue that Arsinoe had normalized, was a nest of vipers. Her brother Ptolemy III, barely a teenager, was manipulated by ambitious courtiers who sought to oust her. Civil war erupted, with Alexandria's streets running red as factions clashed. Cleopatra, with her keen strategic mind, sought allies beyond Egypt's borders. Her alliance with Julius Caesar, sealed by both diplomacy and seduction, was a masterstroke, restoring her to the throne in 47 BCE. Yet it was also a sign of the dynasty's weakness, a queen forced to rely on foreign power to secure her crown. The murder of Ptolemy the Thorn and the subsequent marriage to Ptolemy the Thorn, who was later poisoned, were grim echoes of the fratricidal culture Arsinoe had fostered, a culture where family was both ally and enemy. The arrival of Mark Antony in 41 BCE marked a new chapter in Cleopatra's reign, one of passion and ambition. Their alliance, both political and personal, was a bold attempt to revive the Ptolemaic dream. Cleopatra envisioned an empire that would rival Rome, with Alexandria as its heart. She bore Antony 3 children, weaving a dynasty that could challenge the rising power of Octavian. Yet her ambitions were built on a fragile foundation. The Ptolemaic treasury, once swollen with wealth thanks to Arsinoe's reforms, was depleted by years of mismanagement and war. The court, corrupted by centuries of intrigue, was riddled with factions. And the people of Egypt, once devoted to their divine pharaohs, were growing restless, their faith shaken by the excesses of a dynasty that seemed more mortal than godlike. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE was the turning point, a clash that would decide the fate of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra and Antony, their fleets arrayed against Octavians, fought with the desperation of those who know their time is running out. The defeat was catastrophic, their forces scattered like leaves in a storm. As Octavian's legions marched toward Alexandria, Cleopatra retreated to her city, her dreams of empire crumbling. The final days of her reign were a study in defiance and despair. She fortified Alexandria, rallied her remaining forces, and prepared for a last stand. Yet the weight of Arsinoe's legacy was inescapable. The dynasty, weakened by generations of inbreeding and infighting, could not withstand the might of Rome. In 30 BCE, as Octavian's forces breached Alexandria's walls, Cleopatra made her final choice. The asp's venom, or perhaps a poison of her own making, was her last act of agency, a refusal to be paraded as a trophy in Rome. Her death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, its 3-century reign reduced to ashes. Antony, too, fell by his own hand, their love a fleeting spark in a world consumed by ambition. Alexandria, the city that had once rivaled the heavens, became a Roman province, its pharaohs dimmed, its library destined to burn. The Ptolemaic dream, born in the brilliance of Arsinoe's vision, had ended in ruin, its collapse a testament to the flaws she had woven into its core. The fall of Alexandria was not merely a military defeat, but the culmination of a tragedy set in motion by Arsinoe the Second. Her policies, sibling marriage, a culture of intrigue, a propaganda of divinity, had created a dynasty that was both dazzling and doomed. The genetic toll of inbreeding had produced rulers whose bodies and minds were frail, while the psychological damage of a court steeped in paranoia had turned family into foes. The moral rot she had normalized had spread through the administration, weakening Egypt's ability to resist external threats. Rome's conquest was the final blow, but the true destruction had begun centuries earlier, in the heart of a queen who had turned her pain into policy. Arsinoe's legacy was a paradox of triumph and tragedy. She had survived the horrors of her childhood, her father's abuse, the murder of her sons, the treachery of her husbands to become a queen of unparalleled power. Her reforms had filled Egypt's coffers, her military purges had secured its borders, and her propaganda had deified its rulers. Yet the system she built was a house of cards, its foundations eroded by the very policies she had championed. The incest she institutionalized, meant to preserve power, had instead weakened the dynasty, producing rulers whose frailties were a mirror of her own unhealed wounds. The court she shaped, with its culture of betrayal and excess, had corrupted the very institutions that sustained Egypt, making it vulnerable to Rome's ambition. The psychological profile of Arsinoe, pieced together from fragments of history, is both fascinating and disturbing. She was a woman of staggering intellect, her mind a labyrinth of strategy and foresight. She spoke 9 languages, corresponded with philosophers, and governed with a precision that rivaled any king. Yet her brilliance was inseparable from her darkness. The trauma of her childhood had forged a worldview where trust was a weakness, love a liability, and power the only truth. Modern psychology recognizes the patterns in her life: emotional detachment, a tendency to recreate abusive dynamics, a relentless drive to control. Unlike many perpetrators, she acted with full awareness, crafting elaborate justifications for her policies and building systems to ensure their endurance. This self-awareness makes her legacy all the more chilling, a testament to the human capacity to rationalize even the darkest choices. The broader implications of Arsinoe's reign extend beyond the fall of the Ptolemies. Her story is a case study in how personal trauma can shape political systems, a warning about the dangers of power wielded by those who have not healed their wounds. The Ptolemaic court, with its culture of betrayal and excess, prefigures modern regimes where leaders, driven by personal demons, normalize violence and corruption. The cycle of abuse that Arsinoe perpetuated, victim becoming perpetrator, resonates in contemporary discussions of generational trauma, illustrating how pain, left unaddressed, can metastasize into societal decay. Historians grapple with how to judge Arsinoe. Was she a victim, forced by a patriarchal world to make impossible choices? Feminist scholars argue that her agency was a triumph, her survival a testament to her resilience in a world that offered women little power. She navigated a court where daughters were pawns, transforming herself into a queen who reshaped an empire. Yet this view risks minimizing the harm she caused, the generations of Ptolemies who suffered under her policies, the courtiers corrupted by her example, the people whose faith was shattered by her propaganda. Others see her as a cautionary tale, a reminder that trauma, when given power, can reshape civilizations in its image. The ruins of Alexandria, silent beneath the weight of centuries, bear witness to this tragedy. Tourists wander among the shattered columns, unaware of the story they tread upon. A story of a girl who survived, a queen who ruled, and a dynasty that fell. Arsinoe's legacy is not just the rise and fall of an empire, but a meditation on the human capacity for both creation and destruction. Her intelligence, her ambition, her pain could have been forces for good, but they were twisted by a world that offered her no refuge. She built a dynasty on the ashes of her suffering, but in doing so, she ensured its doom. As the Mediterranean winds whisper through Alexandria's ruins, they carry the echoes of Arsinoe's life, a life of brilliance and darkness, of triumph and tragedy. Her story challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about the line between victim and perpetrator, about the power of trauma to shape history, and about the human capacity to turn pain into policy. She achieved what she set out to do. She survived, she ruled, she left a mark that endured. But the cost was a dynasty that rotted from within, a civilization that fell not to swords, but to the poison of its own blood. In the end, Arsinoe's tale is a requiem for lost potential. The girl who might have been a beacon of wisdom became a queen who wove a legacy of decay. Her policies, born of trauma, created a dynasty that was both magnificent and monstrous, a testament to the human capacity to endure and destroy. As we stand among the ashes of Alexandria, we are left with a final, chilling thought. Arsinoe succeeded by every metric she valued: survival, power, legacy. That this success came atop a pyre of broken lives in a fallen empire might not have troubled her. After all, she had learned long ago that survival demanded everything, even the future. Chapter 7, The Mirror of History. The ruins of Alexandria stood silent beneath a sky bruised with the colors of dusk, their shattered columns whispering of a time when the city was the heart of a world-spanning dream. The Mediterranean's waves lapped at the shore, their rhythm a mournful elegy for a dynasty that had risen and fallen under the weight of its own ambition. The Ptolemaic legacy, forged in the crucible of Arsinoe I's brilliance and pain, was now a memory, its grandeur reduced to dust. Yet the story of Arsinoe, the queen who turned her trauma into policy, endured as a haunting reflection in the mirror of history, a tale of survival, power, and the devastating cost of unhealed wounds. Her life, a tapestry of triumph and tragedy, was not just the story of a dynasty's fall, but a warning etched in time, a reminder of how personal pain can reshape civilizations. This was the final chapter, a meditation on Arsinoe's legacy and the lessons it holds for a world still grappling with the echoes of her choices. The fall of Alexandria in 30th BCE, when Cleopatra VII's death marked the end of Ptolemaic rule, was not merely a military defeat, but the culmination of a tragedy set in motion centuries earlier. Arsinoe II, who had died nearly 2.5 centuries before, had left an indelible mark on Egypt. Her policies, sibling marriage, a culture of intrigue, and a propaganda of divinity had elevated the Ptolemies to godlike status, their wealth and wisdom the envy of the Mediterranean. Yet these same policies had poisoned the dynasty from within, their genetic and psychological toll weakening rulers and eroding the foundations of an empire. As Rome's eagles claimed Alexandria, they found a city hollowed out by its own excesses, a dynasty undone by the very vision that had once made it great. Arsinoe's legacy was a paradox, a delicate balance of brilliance and destruction. She had survived the unthinkable, a childhood marred by her father Ptolemy I's abuse, marriages that were prisons, and the murder of her sons at the hands of her half-brother Ptolemy Cyrannus. From these ashes she had forged herself into a queen of unparalleled power, co-ruling with her brother husband Ptolemy II Philadelphus in a reign that transformed Egypt. Her reforms had filled the treasury with gold, her military purges had secured the throne, and her cult of the sibling gods had deified their rule. She spoke 9 languages, corresponded with philosophers, and governed with a precision that rivaled any king. Yet her brilliance was inseparable from her darkness, her policies a reflection of a soul scarred by trauma. The practice of sibling marriage, Arsinoe's most enduring policy, was both her masterstroke and her curse. Designed to preserve the Ptolemaic bloodline's purity, it ensured that no foreign prince could claim Egypt's throne through marriage. By aligning the dynasty with the divine precedent of Isis and Osiris, she had crafted a propaganda so potent that it silenced critics and awed the masses. Temples rose in her honor, festivals celebrated her union, and coins bore her face alongside her brothers, equal in prominence. Yet this policy was a Pandora's box, unleashing a cascade of genetic and psychological decay. The Ptolemaic rulers who followed Ptolemy IV with his debauchery, Ptolemy the Mate with his cruelty, Cleopatra VII with her desperate alliances, bore the marks of inbreeding, physical deformities, mental instability, and a predisposition to violence that mirrored Arsinoe's own survival-driven ruthlessness. The psychological toll of Arsinoe's legacy was perhaps even more devastating. The court she shaped was a crucible of paranoia, where siblings were both lovers and rivals, and trust was a death sentence. This mindset, born of her own trauma, became the dynasty's defining trait. Children raised in this environment learned from infancy to guard their hearts, to see every smile as a potential threat. The paranoia that had defined Arsinoe's worldview, forged in the betrayal of her father, the cruelty of her first husband Lysimachus, and the murder of her sons became a self-fulfilling prophecy, each generation more consumed by suspicion and violence. By the time of Cleopatra VII, the Ptolemaic court was a battleground, its rulers locked in fratricidal conflicts that echoed the bloodshed of Arsinoe's own life. The cultural impact of Arsinoe's policies was profound, reshaping Egyptian society in ways that lingered long after her death. The Ptolemaic court, once a center of intellectual brilliance, had become a caricature of itself, its halls filled with courtiers who emulated Arsinoe's moral ambiguity. Traditional Egyptian values, honor, kinship, piety eroded as ambition became the currency of power. The religious institutions, once the bedrock of Egyptian identity, were complicit in this decay. Priests bound by royal patronage preached the divinity of the sibling gods, but their words rang hollow, their faith eroded by the demands of a corrupt court. The people once devoted to their pharaohs grew restless, their trust shaken by the excesses of a dynasty that seemed more mortal than divine. This crisis of faith weakened Egypt's spiritual foundations, making it vulnerable to foreign influences, including the rise of Christianity centuries later. The genetic consequences of Arsinoe's policies were starkly evident in the Ptolemaic rulers who followed her. Modern analyses of their mummies reveal a litany of ailments: hemophilia, scoliosis, clubbed feet, and other disorders born of a bloodline too tightly bound. Ptolemy IV's obesity and erratic behavior, Ptolemy VIII's grotesque physicality, and Cleopatra VII's pronounced features were all symptoms of inbreeding depression, a term unknown to Arsinoe, but painfully clear in its effects. These frailties weakened the dynasty's ability to govern, their rulers' instability fueling rebellions and inviting foreign conquest. Rome, ever watchful, saw opportunity in the Ptolemaic dysfunction, its legions poised to claim a kingdom that had rotted from within. Cleopatra VII's reign was the final, desperate attempt to salvage Arsinoe's dream. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were bold gambits to bolster a throne that was crumbling under the weight of its own history. Yet even her brilliance could not overcome the legacy of decay. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE was a shattering defeat, her fleet scattered, her dreams of empire reduced to ash. When Octavian's legions marched into Alexandria in 30 BCE, they found a city weakened by centuries of misrule, its rulers too frail to resist. Cleopatra's death by her own hand was a final act of defiance, but it could not alter the inevitable. The Ptolemaic dynasty, born in Arsinoe's vision, ended in silence, its legacy a cautionary tale of ambition, unchecked by wisdom. Arsinoe's story is more than the rise and fall of a dynasty. It is a mirror held up to the human condition. Her life challenges us to grapple with uncomfortable truths about the line between victim and perpetrator, about the power of trauma to shape systems, and about the human capacity to turn pain into policy. She was a victim of horrific abuse, her childhood stolen by her father's cruelty, her youth marked by betrayal and loss. Yet she was also a perpetrator, a woman who chose to institutionalize the very practices that had scarred her. Her intelligence was staggering. Her reforms transformed Egypt. Her propaganda deified her rule, but it was harnessed to a vision that perpetuated harm. The question of how to judge her remains unresolved, a puzzle that historians and philosophers continue to debate. Feminist scholars argue that Arsinoe was a product of her time, a woman navigating an impossible patriarchal world with limited choices. Her agency, her ability to seize power in a court that viewed women as pawns, was a triumph. Her survival, a testament to her resilience. She outmaneuvered generals, reshaped economies, and crafted a divine narrative that silenced her critics. Yet this view risks minimizing the harm she caused. The generations of Ptolemies who suffered under her policies, the courtiers corrupted by her example, the people whose faith was eroded by her propaganda. Others see her as a cautionary tale, a reminder that trauma, when given power, can metastasize into societal decay. Her psychological profile, emotional detachment, a tendency to recreate abusive dynamics, a worldview that saw all relationships as transactions of power mirrors the patterns of unhealed trauma recognized by modern psychology. Arsinoe's legacy extends beyond the ancient world, resonating in contemporary discussions of power and trauma. The Ptolemaic court, with its culture of betrayal and excess, prefigures modern regimes where leaders, driven by personal demons, normalize violence and corruption. The cycle of abuse she perpetuated, victim becoming perpetrator, offers a historical lens through which to view generational trauma, illustrating how pain, left unaddressed, can shape systems that endure for centuries. Her story is a warning about the dangers of power wielded by those who have not healed their wounds, a reminder that brilliance, without compassion, can become a force for destruction. The ruins of Alexandria, silent beneath the weight of centuries, bear witness to this tragedy. Tourists wander among the shattered columns, unaware of the story they tread upon, a story of a girl who survived, a queen who ruled, and a dynasty that fell. The library, once a vault of human knowledge, is gone, its scrolls scattered to the winds. The Pharos, a beacon of Ptolemaic might, lies in ruins beneath the sea. Yet Arsinoe's presence lingers, her legacy etched in the stones and the stories that endure. She was a woman of staggering intellect, her mind a labyrinth of strategy and foresight. She survived a world that sought to break her, claiming a throne that few women could have held. But her triumph came at a cost, a dynasty poisoned by the very policies she championed. As we stand among the ashes of Alexandria, we are confronted with the enduring power of Arsinoe's choices. Her life was a testament to the human capacity for survival, but also to the danger of turning pain into power. She achieved what she set out to do. She survived, she ruled, she left a mark that echoed through time. But the cost was a dynasty that rotted from within, a civilization that fell not to swords but to the poison of its own blood. Her story challenges us to reflect on our own world, to ask how we break the cycles of trauma that shape our systems, and to consider the cost of power unchecked by healing. In the end, Arsinoe's tale is a mirror held up to history, reflecting both our potential and our peril. The girl who might have been a beacon of wisdom became a queen who wove a legacy of decay. Her policies, born of trauma, created a dynasty that was both magnificent and monstrous, a testament to the human capacity to endure and destroy. As the Mediterranean winds whisper through Alexandria's ruins, they carry the echoes of her life, a life of brilliance and darkness, of triumph and tragedy. We are left with a final chilling thought. Arsinoe succeeded by every metric she valued: survival, power, legacy. That this success came atop a pyre of broken lives and a fallen empire might not have troubled her. After all, she had learned long ago that survival demanded everything, even the future. Thank you for journeying with us through the haunting and captivating tale of Queen Arsinoe II, a story of survival, power, and tragedy that echoes through the ages. We hope this glimpse into the heart of Alexandria's rise and fall has left you both moved and inspired. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's shadows, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends who love epic tales, and hit that subscribe button to stay updated on our latest videos. Your support helps us bring more stories like Arsinoe's to life, uncovering the hidden truths that shaped our world. Join us next time as we explore another chapter of history's untold dramas. See you in the comments.